From the lion's den to the angel's den. We are continuing the study on the book of Daniel.
This lesson, with its story, like the previous ones, comes to show that life is a dynamic travel within all sorts of circumstances, and how do we navigate through them is what builds our character. Who we are is shown very well by the decisions that we make in our lives and by the choices of our priorities and our values. We are already in the chapter 6 in the book of Daniel, and there is a lot of jealousy, faithfulness, and even roaring from beginning to end.
The last few weeks, we have been looking at stories about Daniel, his friends, the world leaders at the time, and there were some important and big lessons out of them. This week follows the same trend. We are looking at another story of Daniel involving big political powers, political games, spiritual challenges, and some important points for those who are willing to learn from experience and history.
And not by chance the stories in the Bible have been selected as they are and written down for generations to come. Jealousy is a strong, powerful feeling that we're not strangers to its workings. After the Babylonians were conquered by the Medo-Persians, there was a new king on the throne, and his name was Darius the Mede. We find also that Daniel had found recognition by this new ruler, and he was appointed to be one of the 3 top administrators over the 120 provincial governors in the whole empire. According to verse 3, we get even a better insight of what's going on in the royal court, and we learn the news that the king planned to set Daniel even over the whole kingdom, because we read Daniel so distinguished himself among the administrators and the governors by his exceptional qualities. If I was one of those 120 provincial governors, or one of those 2 equal to him administrators, I would have gone through an emotional roller coaster just by hearing that Daniel was promoted to be the top, number 2 in the empire. However, I would have finally come to a choice, either being jealous of him or being humbled and recognized and respect his recognition. What a battle this would have been inside in me.
Daniel impressed Nebuchadnezzar and had his full trust. For some reason, he was ignored by Belshazzar until it was too late. But now, even at age, Daniel makes such an impression on Darius that he is ready to entrust him his whole empire. Politics are dirty, and when someone rises, he immediately becomes a target for dirt digging. Everyone has something, right? Well, not Daniel. He was neither corrupt nor negligent, a high standard. Finally, this man said, "We will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel unless it has something to do with the law of his God," according to verse 5. We will never be able to make Daniel break his principles, his relationship with God. Well, let's use that. Let's create a situation where he'll get in trouble just because of his principles and his faithfulness to the relationship with God.
In chapter 6, as we see, we become witnesses of the nitty-gritty in big politics. Games, strategies, backstabbing, vehicles that we can have to get to high power, and in such a way the administrators and the governors crafted a plan to eliminate their competition, Daniel. Under the influence of their advice, King Darius issues a decree that states that everybody should pray and petition only to the king for the next 30 days, otherwise will be thrown in the lion's den. On the surface, it appears like there is some political motivation behind it in edifying and strengthening the leadership of the empire. However, this is just a facade. It's a smoke screen of another cruel political maneuver. So Daniel finds himself in a deadlock and ends up in the lion's den.
How did Darius get played? I mean, he was a smart guy. We are not given details, but maybe the request sounded logical as a strategy against rebellion in the vast territory with diverse cultures and religion, fostering allegiance toward the king. Also, the king was misled that everyone was behind the proposal, so the conspiracy worked. The interesting part, though, for me is how Satan plays his cards to create situations where there is only bad choices. He tried this strategy even with Jesus multiple times. If he says or does certain thing, it will be wrong for the Romans or the law of Moses. If he does or says the contrary, it's still wrong. Daniel is in a similar situation. Either disobey and disrespect the law, or compromise his relationship with God.
I'm mesmerized by two characters in this story. First, of course, Daniel, who goes and prays with open windows despite the death threat that exists there. And secondly, by King Darius, who, after realizing the consequences of his doing, the consequences of his decree, the Bible says he instantly made every effort until sundown to save Daniel because he was greatly depressed for him. The lesson reminds us that Daniel was about 80 years of age at this point of time, which implies that he was in full consciousness and with full understanding making those decisions and choices. He already had this closeness with God. He already had this closeness with angels. Why would he jeopardize all that? And I'm in awe of King Darius, of how quickly he embraces the character and the representation of Daniel and of the God that he continually worshipped to. If I had to unfairly compare King Darius with King Nebuchadnezzar, King Belshazzar, for me, he's miles ahead in his humble approach to power, governance, and recognition of the living God, as he calls him in verse 26.
There is a lot to learn from these examples. Not every challenge that we face will have the immediate happy ending, but when standing for our principles and relationship with God, the final victory is certain and glorious.
And the story ends with God's honor and God's power vindicated for. How? Those who made the evil plot got thrown together with their families in the lion's den, where Daniel came out of it and was brought out of it the next morning. This time, the lions didn't stay hungry. In a cruel way, they devoured all of them. Like every story told before by Daniel in his book, this one also brings a message of God's intervention, seemingly sometimes too late, but never before the end of it. Oh, and even at this age that the prophet was in, again once more he traveled from a life of threats to a divine attention and deliverance, like from the lion's den to the angel's den, as the title says it.
And the study will continue next week with a lesson from the stormy sea to the clouds in heaven.